Attention is not something people give, it's something they react to. Most people think they need to do something big, say something smart, or act in a certain way to be noticed. But in reality, attention works in a much quieter way. It reacts to energy before it reacts to words. There are moments when someone enters a space and nothing obvious happens, but the atmosphere still changes. Not because they spoke louder, not because they tried harder, but because their presence didn't feel ordinary. They are not rushing, they are not chasing reactions, they are not trying to fill every silence, they are simply there, fully aware, fully grounded. And that kind of stillness is rare, because most people are mentally ahead of the moment, thinking what to say next, how to be seen, how to respond. But presence works differently. It keeps you inside the moment, not outside of it. And when someone is fully inside the moment, people start noticing them without effort. Not because they are being watched, but because they feel different in the space. And here's what most people don't understand. Attention doesn't grow when you try to control it. It grows when you stop interfering with your natural presence. The more you try to get attention, the more you lose the natural quality that creates it. But when you are calm, consistent, and unforced, people start to adjust their awareness around you automatically. They don't know why, they just feel it. And that feeling is what stays, not the words, not the actions, but the impression of your presence. Because in the end, people don't remember what you tried to do. They remember how your presence made them feel in that moment. Attention is not something that starts when you speak or when you try to show something about yourself. It starts much earlier, in a space where nothing is said but something is already being felt. There are moments when you enter a place and nothing looks different on the surface. Everything continues as normal. People are talking, moving, living in their own rhythm. But something inside that environment shifts in a way that cannot be easily explained. It is not loud, it is not obvious, it is extremely subtle, but it is there. And the strange part is, you are not doing anything special to cause it. You are simply present, and yet, the way that presence exists changes how the space responds to you. Most people think attention is built through effort, through words, through actions, through trying to stand out. But real attention does not follow effort in that way. It responds to something deeper, something quieter. It responds to how grounded you are in yourself at that moment. When someone is not mentally scattered, not rushing inside their own thoughts, not trying to perform a version of themselves, their presence becomes steady. And that steadiness creates a different kind of awareness in others. People begin to notice without deciding to notice. They become slightly more aware of your movements, your silence, your energy, even when you are not interacting directly with them. Not because you demanded it, not because you asked for it, but because something in your presence feels stable enough to hold attention without force. And that is where most people misunderstand the process. They think they need to do more, say more, prove more. But the more they try, the more they break the natural stillness that actually creates attention in the first place. Because attention is very sensitive to pressure. The moment it feels forced, it starts to disappear. But when it feels natural, when it feels unshaped, it begins to form on its own, and in that moment you realize something very important. You are not chasing attention anymore. You are simply existing in a way that naturally draws awareness without needing to push it. And that is the kind of presence people remember even after the moment is gone. Attention doesn't move in a straight line from action to result. It moves in a much quieter way, almost like it reacts to something before the mind even understands it. Sometimes you are in a moment where nothing important is happening. No big conversation, no clear reason for focus, nothing that logically explains why someone would pay attention. Yet still, their awareness slowly shifts toward you. It doesn't happen like a decision. It feels more like a change in perception that happens on its own. At first, everything feels normal. The space feels equal, balanced, unchanging. But then, Something small breaks that balance. Not something dramatic, just a slight difference in how you carry yourself inside the moment. Maybe you are not reacting as quickly as others. Maybe you are not filling every silence. Maybe you are simply not moving with the same urgency that most people bring into social situations. And because of that, the rhythm changes. People don't always realize it consciously, but their mind starts adjusting to that difference. They start becoming more aware of your timing, your pauses, your stillness, and what makes this powerful is that nothing is being forced. There is no attempt to grab attention, no visible effort to stand out, yet attention begins to form naturally around that stillness. Because the mind is always looking for something steady in a space full of movement, and when it finds it, even quietly, it locks onto it for a moment. That moment of awareness is not loud. It doesn't feel like something big is happening, but internally, something has already shifted in how you are being experienced. And once that shift happens, attention is no longer something you try to get. It becomes something that responds to how naturally you exist inside the moment. Attention doesn't always begin with someone actively noticing you. Sometimes it starts in a much softer way, almost like a background shift in awareness that slowly becomes clearer with time. There are moments where you are simply there, not doing anything unusual, not trying to stand out, not trying to be seen. Everything looks normal from the outside, but internally, something about the experience feels slightly different to the other person. It is not because of a big action. It is because of a small emotional contrast they can't fully explain. Maybe your energy feels calmer than expected. Maybe your presence doesn't rush into the space. Maybe you don't react in the way they are used to from others. And because of that difference, their mind starts paying more attention without them realizing it. At first, it is almost invisible. Just a slight increase in awareness. They notice your timing a little more. They become a bit more conscious of your responses. Not because they decided to, but because something in the interaction feels less predictable than usual. And the mind naturally reacts to that. It leans in quietly. It becomes more observant. It starts tracking details that normally would not matter. Not because those details are important on their own, but because the overall feeling of the moment has changed. What makes this powerful is that you are not trying to create this reaction. You are not pushing for attention. You are not shaping yourself around it. You are simply being present in a way that doesn't interrupt the natural flow of the moment. And that lack of interference is what makes attention grow on its own. Because when nothing is being forced, the mind feels free to observe. And when it observes something steady in the middle of normal interaction, it starts attaching awareness to it naturally. Over time, this awareness becomes familiarity, and familiarity becomes memory, and memory is what makes someone stay in the mind longer than the actual moment itself. Attention doesn't stay constant. It rises and falls based on how something feels in the moment, not just what is happening on the surface. There are interactions where everything looks normal, but the emotional texture underneath feels slightly different. Not in a dramatic way, but in a way that makes the mind slow down for a second, and in that small pause, attention begins to form. It doesn't come from effort or intention. It comes from contrast, from moments that don't feel fully predictable, from energy that doesn't follow the usual pattern people are used to. When someone is too predictable, the mind relaxes and stops paying close attention. But when there is even a slight difference in rhythm, awareness increases without permission. It can be something very simple. The way you pause before responding, the way you don't rush to fill silence, the way your presence feels steady even when the situation is changing around you. And because most people are used to constant movement and constant reactions, stillness feels noticeable. Not loud, just noticeable. That notice is where attention begins, but the important part is that nothing is being forced. There is no attempt to create impact. There is no effort to stand out. The impact happens because you are not interrupting the natural flow of the moment. And when nothing is interrupted, the other person's mind becomes free to observe instead of react. Observation creates awareness. Awareness creates focus, and focus slowly turns into attention, not in a sudden way, but in a gradual shift that happens underneath the surface. And by the time someone realizes they are paying attention, it has already been happening for a while. Because attention doesn't always arrive, sometimes it slowly builds itself in the background of a moment that feels simple on the outside, but different on the inside. Attention doesn't always feel like something active in the beginning. It often starts as a quiet shift in how a moment is experienced, long before anyone names it or understands it. There are situations where everything looks the same on the surface, the same environment, the same type of conversation, the same normal flow between two people. But something inside that experience feels slightly different, even if no one can clearly explain why. And that difference is where attention begins to form. It is not created by trying harder or speaking more. In fact, it often appears when less effort is being used, when there is no pressure to perform, no need to fill every gap, no urgency to control how the moment should go. In that kind of space, something changes in perception. The mind becomes more aware of small details. The timing between words, the pauses that exist between responses, the calmness in how someone carries themselves without forcing direction into the interaction. These things are not loud, they are not obvious, but they are felt, and once something is felt in a slightly different way, the mind starts paying closer attention to it without being told to do so. This attention is not stable at first. It comes and goes, it increases in some moments and fades in others. But each time it returns, it becomes a little more familiar, and familiarity slowly turns into focus. Not because anything is being repeated in a forced way, but because the experience itself has created a pattern in the mind that feels worth returning to. What makes this important is that the shift happens internally, not externally. On the outside, nothing dramatic is happening. But on the inside, the way the moment is being processed is no longer the same as before, and once that internal shift begins, attention no longer needs to be chased. It starts to organize itself naturally around whatever feels different enough to be noticed in a quiet way. Attention doesn't end where a moment ends. Sometimes it continues quietly, long after the interaction is over, without any effort from either side. There are experiences that don't feel powerful in the moment itself. Nothing dramatic happens, nothing unusual is said, nothing clearly stands out at first. But later, when everything becomes quiet again, a certain feeling returns without warning, not the full memory, not the exact words, just the impression of it, and that impression is what stays. It comes back in small fragments. A tone that felt slightly different, a moment that felt calmer than expected, a presence that didn't feel like everything else around it. And because it doesn't feel fully complete in the mind, it keeps returning, not as a thought that is actively chosen, but as a feeling that appears on its own. This is where attention becomes something deeper than awareness. It becomes something that continues beyond the moment it started in. The mind doesn't always hold on to information for long, but it holds on to experiences that created a feeling it couldn't fully categorize. And that is why some moments don't disappear easily. They stay in the background, resurfacing without intention, as if something inside still wants to revisit what was felt. Even when life moves on, that small trace of the moment can still appear unexpectedly, not strongly, not loudly, but enough to remind the mind that something different was experienced. And once something is experienced in that way, it doesn't fully leave. It becomes part of memory in a softer form, not as a clear event, but as a lingering feeling that shows up again when the mind is still. And that lingering feeling is what keeps attention alive. even after the moment itself has already passed.